Hey y'all, it's Red, your favorite non-binary creative life coach, back at it again with the seminar about Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. If you want to join the seminar and talk about the quotes that I pull out of it and what I talk about, please feel free to join me in the comments. Today we are on part 2 of chapter 3, or what I call part 2, because I'm breaking it up into little pieces. And chapter 3 is about understanding and combating shame, and this section is called What is Shame and Why is it so hard to talk about it? So Brené talks about how she starts every meeting about shame with what she calls the shame 1, 2, 3s, and basically these are the rules that she shares. Shame is universal, everybody has it, you have it, your neighbor has it, their neighbor has it, the person across the world, right across through the equator, through the earth has it on the other side. You know, you dig a hole to somewhere, you pop out, you see somebody working on the water line or somebody just trying to eat their lunch sandwich. That person has shame. High majority of people have shame. Then there's we're all afraid to talk about shame, and then there's shame has more control of us, over us, the less we talk about it. Okay, so the definition that Brené came up with from her research about shame is exactly this. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. And you know me, as I read this book, I look at it either through an LGBTQ lens or a writing lens. And looking at this right off the bat through the LGBTQ lens just makes me think of how many LGBTQ folks feel shame for not living up to this weird virtue of being straight or cis, as if within the womb they had the ability to do better, forming their own brains better. You know, you see these quotes, right? To fit societal expectations. It's just wild to me that people expect so much of fetuses and of, even once you're outside the womb and growing, expect so much of people who have not gone to medical school for 300 years, specifically for brain surgery. Okay, so then Brené talks about the 12 shame categories, which are basically the categories that people feel shame about throughout their lives. Such as, I'm not going to list all of them, but such as money and work, family, mental, physical health, religion, and there are 2 that I'm a little confused about still, and I've read ahead and I still don't understand the difference, but there's motherhood/fatherhood and parenting. So if you have any ideas about the difference between that, I would be very open to hearing your thoughts. And this list, everything on this list, it consists of things that humans just experience by living, by existing in this world. So there's explicit trauma, like one-off horrible event trauma on this list, but that's only 1 out of 12, right? There's a lot that can mess us up. Okay, and as for some examples, Brené asks people, hey, what is something that makes you feel shame? What is shame to you? And a couple examples are, shame is raging at my kids, shame is bankruptcy, shame is flunking out of school. And I'd like to say that for people in certain groups and demographics, each group and demographic has their own long-ass list of shit to be ashamed about. Like whether it's about fitting in with the people outside of the demographic or fitting in with the people within the demographic, because there are people within even marginalized demographics that are shamed within it. So this can happen between like people with these different lists, for example, could be, queer folks, people of color, completely different cultures, disabled folks, any minority, and then there's also, the jobs that you have. There's always certain expectations, which it's different. Those are different, very different from identity and from culture, and it is still something that has a list of shames. Maybe several of us have many lists of shames to pay attention to, or to learn how to disregard in some cases. So then Brené talks about how shame is real pain, and that parts of the brain don't know the difference between being, ostracized from community and safety versus like actually getting like smacked, right? It's reinforced in our brain chemistry, the importance of social acceptance. And to go back to the LGBTQ lens, because I just love talking about the danger of being queer. Don't we love it? It's not, I promise, it's not only dangerous to be queer, but this book is sort of about dangers. So that's where we're at, all right? So if shame is already painful to our brains, and it's like perceived as the equal of physical pain, and then so we already feel that. Several people, not everybody that is queer feels that. If we already feel that, and we're feeling that pain, like, why do people feel like they need to do more to like make us feel more, or make people feel worse? Because it's like they're already there. Like, why you gotta be like that? Like I said in a chapter before, a lot of this daring greatly stuff and is about fear, and I'm just like, what are you afraid of? What are you thinking that you're getting rid of by hurting another person for just existing, who doesn't even want you in their life anyway? Like, what are you doing? It doesn't make you look good. It's not cute. It doesn't make you look smart. Just let people live. Okay, so that's my little rant about that. That's what you're here for, right? Then there's this next section about untangling shame, guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment, which people sometimes use interchangeably in casual conversations. For the point of this book, which is less casual, there's a difference between all four of those. So, and also, I'd like to point out, like she does, that these differences are much more than semantics. Excuse me. And I'll talk a little bit more about that near the end of this section. Though I think it's the most important thing to talk about is how language shapes our experiences in the world, and how it shapes our perceptions of other people, and how it shapes, based off of our perceptions, our actions towards ourselves and other people. And maybe I'll just repeat that at the end of this. Who knows? We'll see what my notes say. So basically, the easy way to tell between guilt and shame is that guilt is I did something bad, and then shame is I am bad. And that's just like pretty common knowledge within like the coaching and therapeutic community. So I promise that's not just me stealing what Brené says. She just says it really nicely. So guilt, I did something bad, but I can still be a good person, have a good heart, soul, mind, body, whatever. And then shame is just like straight up, I'm terrible, I'm trash, I can't change. We all have feelings about people that say that. And as people who say that, we have feelings about ourselves, don't we? So when we feel shame, we are most likely to protect ourselves. And I'm going to put little quotes around that. She doesn't have quotes in here, but I'm going to put little quotes around that. We are more likely to protect ourselves by blaming someone or something, rationalizing our lapse, offering a disingenuous apology, or hiding out. Doesn't sound great, does it? And then moving on to more talk about the word guilt, when we actually apologize for something genuinely, or we change a behavior, that's usually guilt that is the driving force. And she says that it's an uncomfortable feeling, but it's helpful. The psychological discomfort, something similar to cognitive dissonance, is what motivates meaningful change. So shame is not helpful because it can leave you in a state of lack and pain and maybe rage or freezing or just unwillingness, willfulness rather than willingness to do anything because you think it's impossible, right? Which moves on to our next point, is that in Brené's research, she finds that shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we can change and do better. And that shame is highly correlated with addiction, violence, aggression, depression, eating disorders, and bullying. There are no data to support that shame is a helpful compass for good behavior. We all try to shit on ourselves about not doing something, and we feel worse. And it doesn't make us do the thing. Sometimes being nice to ourselves also doesn't quite make us do the thing, but if we're not going to do the thing anyway, and the thing is some goal that you have, right? But if we're not going to do the thing anyway, why not be nice and encouraging to yourself rather than just throwing yourself in a hole? Why put so much effort into being rude? You wouldn't do that to your friend, right? And if you would, maybe get some coaching, because that can be problematic. I made a video about that I posted a bit ago about shaming your friends, so maybe watch that. So then I kind of think about this also from a writing perspective specifically, just because lots of writers get wrapped up in shame too, specifically. They identify as the words that they write down. Even first and second drafts, which are supposed to be terrible, you're on track, you are good, everybody else but you knows that you are good if you just get a first draft down, even if it's a pile of steaming anything you don't like. You're ahead of the game if your first draft is trash. So, if you ask anybody else other than the inside of your brain, you're gonna hear people be like, "Oh yeah, good job, you did the thing." But inside your brain, you're just like, "No, these words are me." Mary went to the drugstore. Oh my God, I am this sentence. Mary went to the drugstore, and it's so boring. No, you are not Mary went to the drugstore, and you are also not Mary or the drugstore. And you're not what Mary did at the drugstore. You are not your writing. Well, you're the, more accurately, what represents you best is the writing at the end of the process after all the hard-ass work you did, because you did all that hard-ass work. I know a first draft is difficult to do too, but the last draft is more, it's closer to what you intend from your heart, because the first draft is just this is a word that's close enough for me to communicate it for this sentence or for this paragraph or whatever. But then as you go through the editing process, you find closer and closer and closer and closer words. and better and better and better ways to be connective to your audience. That's what represents you, is that you're diligent and that you did the thing. And I'm saying the thing a lot, but you know what I mean. Yeah, you're not your first draft, you're not your second draft. You don't have to just believe that it's you and then just quit, right? Because that can happen. It's that people are like, this draft isn't perfect, but then they just like freeze and they're like, oh, that means that I'm never going to be a good writer, and that they're not a good person, and that they're unworthy of being seen in this way. Yeah, and I just think that's sad. And I actually recently joined a music producing group, and it's actually kind of cool to see. I mean, it's sad, but it's cool to see that music producers experience the same thing. It's like, oh, I just have like an idea and I put down one beat, but then it's terrible and I can't figure out what to do next. And then I just like stop and move on. And I just have this big library of just like beats or just, some sound, and I just move on and I can never finish. It's like, we get it. We understand. We are all there. Okay, to move on to humiliation. Simply, it is, okay. Brené takes a quote of another guy, Donald Klein, and he describes humiliation as people believe they deserve their shame. They do not believe they deserve their humiliation. And this is probably because, shame often hits our some trigger point of something that we've been taught over our lives, something that people have tried to make us believe over our lives, and that has been in our brains. Whereas humiliation is just like, oh, that's a surprise. I've never heard that. Something must be going on. And as they say in the book, is that often humiliation is caused by the other person's some sort of shame trigger in them, and it's not about you. But it's important to recognize if there's like a nugget of truth, obviously. You can't just be like, oh, my boss is extremely mad at me. Wonder what that's about, and then, kick your feet up and not do anything about it. But, yeah. And if humiliation, however, continues on and on and on, then of course it can become shame if we start to buy into it, right? And then the last idea is embarrassment. And Brené talks about how basically embarrassment is something that we know other people have experienced. I like how she says it. We know other folks have done the same thing, and like a blush, it will pass rather than define us. I just thought that was beautiful. I'm sure there are people that have experienced what we would call embarrassment, even if we don't think that other people have experienced it. But I think that's getting too far into the weeds. So so again, I'd just like to kind of finish off by saying that language is important because it's how we perceive the world and how we interact with it and how we interact with ourselves and how we set up our own mindsets. Not saying that if you're just positive about everything will manifest in your lap. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that if you, complain about everything all the time, then that's going to reflect in your mindset and how you interact with the world. And I say that violence and virtue are built from language, especially shaming language, because shaming language can become kind of popularized and acceptable. And then people tend to act more on either using that language or what they think the language is calling for. And it thinks that the language is giving them permission to, be violent or terrible. And this happens sometimes until it's like a global issue. I'm not going to go super deep into this. I'm just going to mention it. But if you want to learn anything about this, just look into the language of like the patriarchy and misogyny. People say terrible things to each other and then they just think it's okay. And it's just like these little moments that can just like crack our hearts bit by bit by bit by bit. So the cracking of hearts is where I'm leaving you off today. And I guess I did not talk for a shorter amount of time. I still hope you enjoyed this. I'm having a time myself. So I'll see you next time.